So, hi, Jesse. It's nice to meet you. Really excited to talk to you today about your experience.
Thank you for having me, Noel.
So, to start off, can you just tell me a little bit more about yourself, where you grew up, what your life was like as a kid?
Sure. My name is Jesse Crossan. I grew up in Central Virginia in a city called Charlottesville that both my parents had somehow ended up in. My parents got together for a love of kind of drinking and numbing themselves through drugs and alcohol and other means, and couldn't have looked more different. My mother was this like upstanding, respectable attorney in the community, and my dad literally looked straight out of a Cheech and Chong movie. Had lived this like long, crazy criminal life. Had been a hero and a revolutionary, and just like a total scumbag. Had kind of worn all the faces, and I'm really fortunate that when I was young, they both stopped drinking. They both started kind of living a different life, but very early on, they realized if they weren't drinking and getting high, they really didn't have anything in common anymore. So they split when I was young. There was a lot of less than ideal circumstances in the home and in the community and in kind of the environment that I grew up in. But I did the best I could. I was a charismatic kid. I just kind of went along with things, but I was always kind of struggling. So in school, I always felt aside or different or kind of missing from everybody else. And as I got older, I learned to cope in different ways. I kind of locked myself into a book, or eventually I locked myself into a room or into a bottle or into whatever I could find, and basically tried to cope with the world by running away and pushing all the feelings down until just after my 18th birthday, I got into a lot of trouble.
Such a common story. I feel like that kind of trauma, childhood experiences, not knowing how to deal with these feelings, pushing them down, turning to substances. Unfortunately, it's too common. So tell me a little bit more about your path to the justice system. When were you first involved? What did that look like? What led to your eventual incarceration?
Sure. So as a juvenile, I did get in trouble once. Well, I guess I got in trouble twice. I got a speeding ticket, a really bad one that they took my license for. And then I got this kind of combination of a short span of time. I went with a bunch of buddies and we went to go steal beer from a grocery store. And then additionally, I got a possession of alcohol for driving. So to be full disclosure, I was driving drunk. I was 16. It was irresponsible. I came around the corner. There was a deer in the road. I swerved, but then I walked home and walked back. And by the time after all this had happened, the police officer got there, he couldn't prove that I'd been driving, that I could have drank on the way home. And he just kind of said, "Oh, this is, good old boy stuff. This is what happens. Like, we'll cut you a break. We're going to get you a possession of alcohol. You have to go see a PO, but that's it." And it was kind of an example of the discretion that police officers and prosecutors have, where this could have been a very serious thing. He could have pushed me on it. I think there was actually marijuana in the car, and this is back when marijuana was such a serious offense. And they could have pushed and made an issue of it, but instead he just kind of swept it under the record and said, you look like good parents. You just take care of him, make sure he stays on the right path. And those, I mean, I do think those were fairly normal teenager experiences. Not justifying them, not saying that they were okay, but it was very common in my area for that to be the case for pretty much everybody. But it's just the consequences were different depending on where somebody came from. But it was really right before my 18th birthday. It was about 3 months before that I found a cocaine dealer, and that it was like this light switch. So I went from this kid who was on his way to college, who was going to take a year off, and then I was exploring all kinds of different career paths. I was looking at different volunteer opportunities. Like I wasn't in the best place, but I definitely wasn't in the worst place. And then I found cocaine, and as we talked before about that kind of childhood experience, I felt like I'd found the solution to all the things that I'd been missing. Like, this is the thing that makes me feel whole. This is the that makes me feel like deserving of love and okay and strong and capable. And it really was, a 3 month decline. Up till that point, I think I was on kind of a rocky edge and headed down. But at that point, it was just like a steep precipice, and I just fell straight off. And at the bottom of that was just after my 18th birthday, I committed a robbery and I committed an unrelated shooting. I'm just incredibly lucky that no one died, that, everyone managed to kind of come out of it alive, if scarred.
Wow, that is a fast spiral.
Yeah.
And so what happened after this incident?
So it was two separate things. They were unrelated, but after the robbery, we just kind of freaked out, and we were just trying to get more money for drugs. It was me and three of my buddies, and we had run out all the debt and sold all the stuff we could, and we're just kind of in this hole. And then the shooting happened behind two guys threatening a guy's girlfriend, and me trying to step in and be the hero because I had so much shame around the life I'd been living and having committed the robbery, and then feeling like I needed to do something to be the hero or do something to be the good guy, and putting myself into a situation where yeah, they were chasing me and I was scared and they had guns and I had guns. And it was a terrible situation that all could have been avoided by not putting myself into these situations and not continuing to kind of like deal with my trauma or deal with my insecurity in these outward ways.
Hmm. And so tell me a little bit about you got involved in the justice system. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was shocking because for the possession of alcohol or the stealing beer charges, I think they had locked me up in the little room under the courthouse for like an hour, but that was my only experience with incarceration. All of a sudden, I'm going to the jail. I was denied bail, and I was told, like, yeah, you're going to be here. You're going to be here for years, maybe decades. And all of a sudden, it was kind of like that light switch again. But it wasn't that it just everything changed. It was just this light switch of believing, like, oh, all those fears I had were right. I really am worthless. I really am beyond hope. I really am beyond saving. And then that kind of continued with sentencing. So after I'd pleaded guilty to all the charges and had all kinds of other legal fiascos happen, but I basically sat in front of the judge and said, "Hey, I did these things. I messed up. I need help. Like, will you please? Like, obviously, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to deal with my life. Like, please send me to a place where I can get help because all I see in this jail is people being warehoused here and people miserable and people struggling to cope and having mental breakdowns and not having access to resources." And the judge kind of scoffed at me. And the day I walked into that courtroom, my sentencing guidelines called for between 8 and 13 years. And my lawyer said, "Hey, you'll probably get the midpoint. You'll get about 10 years. You did some really bad stuff and like you deserve 10 years." And I said, "Okay, I can deal with that." That day, they modified the guidelines to 10 to 16 years and said, "Oh, well, maybe you'll still be good because he saw the old guidelines. Maybe he'll go on the lower end." And the judge sentenced me to serve 138 years with 106 suspended. So doubled the active guidelines to 32 years. And that was really the moment where it was like the light switch went all the way off, or like all the blinds went shut. And this is proof. Like even the judge knows that I'm worthless and I'm beyond hope and beyond redemption. And that was really when I gave up.
Wow, that is so awful. It was so awful. Well, you're out now and you've turned things around. So talk to me about after your sentencing, just what opportunities were you able to access during your incarceration? How did you get out? What kept you going while you were in?
Yeah, I think the line that best describes it is that people believed in me until I could believe in myself. So in that place, I didn't see any way forward. I didn't have any hope, but I was able to go to college. And that back then there was no second chance pal. It was all paid out of pocket. It was all my mom scrambling money because she believed I'd be able to make something of this time. And it was my dad believing things that, oh, this is what I did with this time, or this is what my friend did with this time. And I thought they were all full of it, but I had nothing better to do. And I didn't trust myself, so I decided to trust everybody else and the directions they would give me. And as far as opportunities, there weren't necessarily a lot provided by the prison system, but because I had people who cared and people were willing to fight for me, yeah, I was able to get a college degree. It took 15 years and it took, a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of bureaucratic red tape, but I was able to do that. I was able to become a journeyman electrician. I love to write and I love to read and had articles published. And we had this massive drug problem, this massive, lack of mental health treatment. So we managed to help start a peer support mental health program in the institution. So I was able to be involved in a meaningful way in a lot of these things. And most of it, again, wasn't provided by the state, but it was us kind of coming together and saying, hey, like we're hurting or we're miserable or we need this thing or we need to figure out how to help one another doing that. And it taught me a lot about the way to be kind of from within a group that like didn't have the resources, a way to adapt and to struggle. And we did. And I'm really proud of some of the things that I did while I was inside. And a little under 19 years in prison, and the governor granted me a conditional pardon. Basically acknowledged the work that I'd done, acknowledged the fact that I was, just after my 18th birthday at the time of the crimes, acknowledged that I was sentenced to twice the high point of the sentencing guidelines, and basically just said, and this was the thing that touched me the most, that society was benefited more by me being on the outside than being on the inside. And I think of all the arguments or all the things he said, that was the one that made me feel the greatest sense of hope because it was somebody in a position of power saying, "Hey, you have value and you have worth, and like you've earned this or you've shown this."
I love that. That is so powerful. You mentioned your mom was an attorney. Did she help with your pardon, or how did that effort begin?
So when I filed for a conditional pardon, I had no expectation of it working. This was at a time where maybe 4 people a year receive a pardon from the governor, and it was all based on political donations and PR for the presidential campaign to follow. But it wasn't a feasible option. It was just something that I was doing because somebody had taught me that you can do everything in your power and then you have let go to the result. And that was my view. Like, cool, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to let go of the result and I'll be able to have the next 10 or 12 years in prison in peace, knowing that I tried everything. And after I filed it talk about a perfect storm. A local journalist who happened to be friends with me on Facebook, where my mother posted the articles that I wrote, who happened to read it and be doing an article about the abolition of parole, and happened to know somebody in the community. So I had a news story that And so she came to me, and she came to a conservative elected official who was very much in favor of the abolition of parole, and kind of got two sides of the story. Like, why was this a good thing and why was this a bad thing? And I get to talk about the 16-year-old kid who got a 90-year sentence for a robbery in which nobody was hurt. And the fact that because we had no parole, that kid had no chance. And it just was fundamentally unfair. And that somebody, in that kid's case, an example, he was a juvenile, and the three adults involved in that case, no one got more than 10 years. But there were no checks and balances. There was no way to review that because it was within statutory limits. So the court said, yeah, this is not reversible. So we had that conversation, and it got a lot of exposure. And then it turned into something I didn't expect. My mother put these pleas out and asked for letters of support, and I got hundreds and hundreds of letters of support. I had a friend who had randomly started working for someone who had a good relationship with the chief of staff of the governor, and I had another friend who happened to know the secretary of the Commonwealth, and it just became this thing of exposure. And then I think more importantly, the governor had a scandal. He had did something really he very poorly handled a political situation from the past, and basically he was asked to step down from office, and they said, we think that you're a racist and we think this is inappropriate. And his response, I think, was very, very kind of measured. He said, okay, well, if let's look at this, let's look at the ways that races are disproportionately affected by the criminal justice system, by our social welfare system, by government services. Let's actually look at this. And one of the things he did was direct the parole board, the existing parole board from before, to review the cases of pardons in the criminal justice system. And at the point that I was released, Governor Northam released and granted more pardons than every Virginia governor in history combined. In a single term, he said, "Hey, let's do a sweeping reform here." There were 100 of us who were pardoned that actually led to our release from prison, and of those 100, not a single has reoffended, not a single has had a technical violation, not a single has had a speeding ticket. It was basically a clear case of the fact that there are people incarcerated that don't need to be, and that it was in the government's interest and really in the Commonwealth's interest to release these people and allow them to pay taxes and be contributing members of society.
That is incredible. When was this?
August 16th of 2021.
Okay, so that was the day you were released. Talk to me about that day. How did it feel? Who was there?
God, it was intense because I didn't know it was coming. I knew there was some chance they would review my pardon. I knew there was some chance that I would hear something, but it was just a day like any other. I got up at the same time that I did, and that reporter who had covered a story on me had since left the news, or left the TV station, and she and I had developed a personal relationship, interestingly enough. And so I was calling her that morning, and then I was going to work at medical, where I cleaned up medical waste as a grand opportunity to escape the dormitory, because it was far better to be cleaning up medical waste than it was to be stuck in there with 79 other guys fighting over the phone or fighting over some corner to have a sense of quiet. And I came back, did a bunch of burpees, and was actually going to get back on the phone when the counselor called me into the office and was just excited and waving. And this is in the middle of COVID, and she never let anyone within 6 feet of her without a mask on. She had her mask off. She called me in. She said, "I don't care about your effing mask." And I get in there, and there's somebody on the speakerphone, and they said, "Mr. Crossan, are you sitting down?" And I said, "No, why?" And they said, "Because you've been granted a pardon. You're leaving Coffeewood Prison today. Like, you're going home." And so this day that started out like any other, all of a sudden I'm just kind of like falling to a knee and tearing up and not knowing how to react. And an hour and a half later, I'm walking out the door, and I hadn't seen my mother in a year and a half because there had been no visitation, there'd been no access. And I'm giving my mother a hug, and we're walking out the front door, and I'm seeing the fresh, free air for the first time in 19 years. And then driving down to the end of the road and actually meeting that reporter, and then going off and trying to figure out how to start a life in the middle of the day on a Monday. Like, or maybe it was a Friday, I can't remember. Do I get like clothes? Do I get food? Like, what do I have to do? I don't know how to be a person in the world. I haven't done it for my entire adult life.
Yeah, so talk to me more about that transition. It's hard for a lot of people that I talk to who have been incarcerated for a long time. Where did you start? Did you live with your mom? What kind of barriers did you experience because of your record?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest barrier wasn't even necessarily because of my record. I was just heavily institutionalized. I didn't know how to make decisions. We went to Costco because I figured that was a place we could go to find everything, and I was overwhelmed and had a panic attack. And the idea not only of dealing with the space and the people, but of also having to make that many decisions. Because I'd worn the same state clothes, either blues or a jumpsuit, for all those years. I'd ordered from the same commissary where I had three options of everything, and that was it. To going and being like, wait, I can have whatever I want to eat, or I could choose how I dress, or I could choose what I want to do for work. Like, these aren't options I'm used to having. I was just overwhelmed. And there were a lot of barriers in place. Somebody in the parole office had mistakenly checked that I had a sex offense. So all of a sudden, I've got probation and parole calling me in and saying, "Oh, we're going to need you to register as a sex offender. Like maybe this is a mistake, but you're just going to have to do it anyways." And I'm in this position where I'm newly out of prison. I'm completely losing my mind. Now I'm having a breakdown and like wondering, do I like run to Mexico? Like I can't do this because if they make me register as a sex offender, I'll never be able to have a life and it was just crazy. And it literally took, I mean, I called DOC, I called probation parole, I called everybody. Nobody cared. And finally, I got somebody actually from the governor's office who was involved in my pardon to look into it. And then I get this apologetic call from the head of probation parole. We were wrong. You're right. This was not the case, but like we're just not going to talk about it anymore. And that was my entry into probation and parole. Like, yeah, we're just going to basically accuse you of a bunch of things randomly and then not really apologize or do anything to address it. And it kind of set the tone for the fact that the system was fundamentally not there to support me. It was there to kind of contain me or like build walls around me. And that was difficult to deal with because I like to believe that there were good people out there. And what I
Mhm.
do have to say is that there are, because I later had a probation officer who, when Courtney and I, that reporter, ended up having a breakup, literally like texted me and said, "Hey, are you okay? I saw this thing on social media and I heard about your breakup and let me know if you need anything. Let me know how I can help." So I saw that in this system that is definitely designed to kind of cage and punish, were people that cared and were people that wanted to try to help. But yeah, it was not an easy process.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that is crazy. Tell me about where did you work? Did you find employment? What was that
Sure.
search like for you?
Yeah, so there are a lot of barriers around that, and I got lucky because a lot of those barriers were delayed. You asked me before where I lived, and I did live with my mother for a month because one of the conditions of the conditional pardon was I had to have a place to live, and the only place that they could approve in time was my mother's address. But it was 45 minutes outside of town, and I mean, there's all kinds of childhood stuff that didn't go away just because I was gone for prison. So as soon as I could, I got out of there, and I was really lucky that there was a private landlord who had an ADU or a mother-in-law unit who said, "Hey, I love your story. I love what you're doing. I want to help you out. Like, please feel free to come stay here." So I was able to get into town. I was no longer outside of town. I was able to have free access to work. I was doing some construction, some carpentry at first, and then I got a job for a local publisher, just kind of being the in between or the kind of expediter. And then I started applying for jobs. And I think one of the only reason I got an interview with the big university was because they thought I'd been a DOC employee. Because a lot of people just have a blank and empty resume and they don't know what to put. So I put all my DOC jobs, I put all the things I'd done, all my volunteer work, and I went in and they were like, you had a lot of years invested. Like, what made you leave the Department of Corrections? And that was when it clicked, and I was like, oh, no, no, I didn't live there. I mean, I didn't work there. I lived there. And they looked kind of dumbfounded, and we went back and forth. And thankfully, I ended up working for this publisher because I'm not sure what my reception would have been with that. But it was just a reminder that people don't really consider things, or people have those prejudices. It's like they didn't think I looked like somebody who had spent almost 20 years in prison, so in their mind, I must have worked there. But
Wow,
weirdly,
it's
you
amazing.
know,
Love
I
that.
I worked for that publisher and I lived in town. And then Courtney and I ended up buying a house. We were in a position where we were both making decent money and we could afford to do that. And there was no barrier around that. I could buy a house, I could sign on the dotted line. We managed to get the money together. But when we broke up and moved out of that house, all of a sudden it was difficult to find an apartment because it's either, criminal record need not apply, or hey, we'll take your $100 application fee, but we're not going to give you a call back, or we'll take your $50 application fee and we'll tell you we're really sorry, but you haven't been selected. And again, I had to get lucky and I found a small kind of private landlord who said, "Hey, I don't do background checks. I don't do credit checks. Give me three references." And it's so interesting because the three references I'd gotten out and I'd started doing activism and volunteer work in the community. So my three references were the woman whose mother in law unit I'd stayed in and the Commonwealth attorneys or the prosecutors for both the county and the city. And I remember thinking, like, okay, this guy's going to Google me. He's going to see my story. He's going to see the prosecutors like me and think it's okay. And it was a year later that I had a conversation with him, and he had no idea who I was. He was just like, "Oh, he must work for the city. It's yeah, great. I love city employees. Like that'll work well." And I wonder what would have happened if he had Googled my name and seen my record, and would I have gotten that place to live?
Wow, that's incredible. Had a similar story here with a woman that I was helping through my journey that put the Salt Lake County mayor down as reference because we had gotten her a job at the county. And it's just really, really interesting, just to your point, the assumptions that people make when they see people, when they see references. And, not everybody's so lucky, but I'm happy it worked out for you. Okay, so tell me more about the nature of your work.
Sure. So, because I was institutionalized and didn't know how to make my own decisions, when I got out, I had a friend who was in marketing who just said, "Jesse, I think your story is fascinating, and I think a lot of people will. You need to go make a video and post it on social media." I didn't know what that like. I didn't know what that meant. I literally had to learn to download the app, and I downloaded TikTok. And the whole time I was in prison, I had this plan that I was going to go to my favorite hike, which was just outside the city. I was going to go to the top. I was going to eat Chinese food. I was going to cry and scream and like somehow let go of all the baggage from those years in prison. And so I went to do that, and I got to the top of the mountain, and I didn't know what to do, and it wasn't a magic. There was no like healing ceremony. It didn't all go away, but I just made a video and said, "Hey, this is who I am." And when I go look back at that video, I was so mechanical and so kind of like barely functioning, and it went viral. And I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know the implications, but it was the middle of the pandemic still. I was working, but I had nothing to do at night. So I just started making videos and answering comments and doing lives and interacting with people. And within 5 months, I had 500,000 followers on TikTok. And within a year, I had over 1 million. And then all of a sudden, I'm in this kind of spotlight of being the prison guy. Like I went to the DNC in Chicago, and the number of people are like, "Hey, you're the prison guy, aren't you?" And so I'm in this weird position of being representative or being asked to represent kind of this great class of people or this incredible situation. And I was actually on my fifth or sixth round of interviews for a big national nonprofit based out of San Francisco. And I happened to go to a party and I meet this guy. And this is, again, you talk about the happenstance or the things that just come about. I talked to this guy and he asked about my story and we go back and forth and he starts taking notes, which I thought was really weird. And the next morning, I get an email from this guy, and he says, "Hey, I don't want you to take this job, and here's why." And he lists all the people he knows in the organization, or the donors, or the board. And he says, "I believe this so strongly that if you start a 501(c)(3), I'll fund you. Like I'll give you seed funding. I don't care what you do. I believe in you, and I believe in your story." And so, Second Chancer Foundation was born, where we had to figure out, well, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to best impact things?
That's
And
incredible.
well, and again, I had no idea what to do. I had never run an organization. I had never raised money. I'd never operated a team. So I thought about what I needed, and I thought about how beneficial it would have been to find reentry support because I got out and the doors of the local reentry center were closed. This OAR program, there was nobody answering the phone. There were no doors open. So we started with classes that were really comprehensive about all the kind of services or support someone would need coming out, as far as relationships and employment and housing and parenting and all the things. But the problem we found was we started with 14 people in our pilot and we graduated four because one, when people were on fire and they were new and they were scared, they were willing to do anything. But two, life is busy and it's hard, and people had to get second jobs and people had to take care of their kids, and they just didn't have the time. So in the interim of trying to figure out, well, how do we do that in a situation where people do have time? We started working in the local juvenile center because I had a staff member reach out to me and just basically cry and say, "I can't lose another kid. Like they do so well in here, and they're such good kids, and then they go out either to the same homes or to the same neighborhoods or the same politics, and then they end up dying or hurting one another or coming right back, and I can't do that anymore." So we organized a monthly leadership summit where we bring in formerly incarcerated leaders in the political space, the business space, the kind of communal space, and allow them to share their stories. And basically the message is, "Hey, I've been where you are. I've sat in that seat, but you haven't been where I am. Like if you want help, here's my hand. I'd love to bring you along with me." And just some incredible relationships and incredible stories. We ended up having family days. We ended up just organizing into this much larger effort. But that was a local thing and it felt very limited. But I thought about that on a bigger scale in the adult system. And when I looked at what fundamentally had allowed me to be the person that I was, it was the relationships I had to people who guided me. I had a mentor when I was inside and a teacher, and I had a mentor on the outside, and they just kept opening doors, both kind of like doors into the social world, but also doors into different parts of myself that I wouldn't have seen or I wouldn't have had access to.
That's incredible. So, how has your work evolved over time? Like, what is the focus of your nonprofit now? Do you still work with juveniles and adults, or talk to me about what you're doing?
Sure. So I've actually left Charlottesville, so I'm no longer there, but we have someone who is kind of a surrogate doing work in the juvenile center still bringing in leadership summit classes and speakers. But we've developed a platform. We have a platform that connects incarcerated people with mentors. And we basically wanted to use technology as a force multiplier because we realized that I could work with maybe two or three or four or five people, and we could find somebody else to work with two or three or four people. But if we develop a platform that's kind of a marketplace for incarcerated people and mentors, we can connect them and we can facilitate that communication in ways that satisfy their kind of corporate needs for security, where their personal identifying information is stripped away, or where it's automated, where they don't have to worry about software being loaded on their computer. And we built this network to where we're now nationwide, which we didn't actually intend to be, but in relationship for the advertising, it's now been promoted on every tablet that has a Adovo software on it in the nation. And so we're getting all this outreach, all these letters, all these emails, and we're working to try to scale that up and figure out, hey, how are we going to grow this program and make sure that we can help everybody that needs help?
That's amazing. How many people are on your platform nationally?
Unfortunately, a lot. Again, we were still working in the kind of pilot stage. We were prepared for like 10, maybe 50 people, and the number of emails and letters we got in that first week exceeded that. So again, we're in the point. I was actually on a call with our technology partner earlier today, trying to figure out, hey, where do we do this? Like, what do we need to do this? Do we need to fundraise? Do we have a solution now? Can we just kind of bootstrap it? And yeah, we're trying to figure out how to do that, but at the same time, maintain the focus on quality relationships, maintain the focus on there actually being an output. Because so often people just care about numbers. Like, we connected 1,000 people. Well, yeah, if
Right.
they exchanged a text and nothing else happened, that's kind of meaningless. It's like, how do we actually facilitate relationships that are beneficial to the people inside, but also ultimately beneficial to the mentor as well? Allow them to kind of see the benefits of their labor.
That's really incredible. Do you have a presence in Utah and Arizona?
I'm not sure if I think we do in Arizona. I'm not sure about Utah. Again, we have specific partnerships in some states, but we developed a partnership with Edovo, which does the software for the tablets. And again, we were working with just a few other facilities, and when they said they were going to expand, we didn't realize they were going to expand everywhere. So if they have Adovo tablets in Utah or Arizona, we do have a presence there.
Oh, that's amazing. Yes, they do have Adobo tablets in Arizona. I don't, they are coming online in Utah. I know Brian. I actually saw Brian Hill last week at the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative Conference. So Brian's a friend of mine. That's really cool. I didn't realize you had that relationship with Adobo. And so talk to me a little bit about how it works. Like I'm familiar with Adobo and kind of their platform. But is your program on that platform? Can it be accessed to people then when they transition back into the community?
Yeah. So it's Adovo is just kind of the platform. They're not actually the communication
Right.
network. So we have it set up to where the easiest path for us is physical mail because there are no barriers. We don't have to interface with the companies that have the software in place. So if someone sends a physical letter to our virtual mailbox, it's scanned, it's processed, it's run through ChatGPT, it's run through Google, and then it's processed and emailed to the mentor. So the mentor has given us their email address, and they just get the original letter. They also get a suggested response, some of the metrics, some of the resources, some of the suggestions from ChatGPT or a large language model. And then they have the opportunity to respond to that. Then it goes back through our system. It's reprocessed, and again, their personal identifying information is removed. It's kind of flagged for any of the 108 violations that the BOP has as far as mail policy. We're checking to make sure that we have kind of security both ways. We're flagging to make sure, okay, nothing untoward is happening, nothing inappropriate is happening. And then as long as none of those checks are set off, it's automatically printed out and mailed back to the incarcerated person.
That's amazing. And so you're connecting the incarcerated person with a mentor. And then what does that look like when that person's released into the community? Does the mentor typically help with that transition point?
And that's ideally like when I look at those relationships that really kind of sustained me and propelled me forward, they were relationships that were started while I was incarcerated and then moved out. Now, for some of the corporate partners we've talked to, they're not comfortable with that. They don't want that. So we have a limitation at the door. But what we do is we basically give the individual a mentor an option. Like at this point, this person's nearing release. Do you want to check this box, which is going to allow your personal identifying information to come out? Do you want separate contact information? Do you want to operate outside of our system? We'd prefer that you continue to operate within so we can gain kind of metrics and data so we know what's effective and what isn't and what the effect of that long-term relationship is. But at the same time, ultimately our goal is to make sure that people have resources. And if that means we don't get the credit for it, that's fine. Because if they have that mentor or that resource that's going to help propel them forward, we'd prefer that over some kind of arbitrary metric.
Yeah, that's incredible. What does the future hold for you? You sound like you're at such an exciting point. You now have these letters coming in from all over. What do you hope to do and where do you hope to go from here?
Ideally, we want to have a mentor available for every incarcerated person in the country. Not everybody's going to take advantage of that resource, and that's okay. Like what I realized is that I can't save anybody. I can give people a rope, I can give people a hand up, but I can't save anybody. So we want to make sure those resources are available, and the more people we can give access to, the more success stories we're going to have. And my hope is that we continue to grow with corporate partners, we continue to grow with larger organizations, and I want to see networks that are already reaching into people so that it's not just a tagline that reentry begins on day one, but that people are actually developing relationships and developing skills and moving forward so they are ready for their release. And then once they land, they have those relationships and those foundations to build upon.
Can you talk to me about why you think campaigns to raise awareness of just the number of people who have been involved in the criminal justice system, who have records, why are these campaigns important?
I think it's about proximity. Brian Stevenson says a lot about that we can't solve a problem if we're not proximate to it. We can't even understand a problem, and we don't even maybe know their problem exists unless we're close to it. And that's been my experience, and that's been really the kind of power of social media for me is that I can get into someone's screen in their bedroom or their bathroom or their office or whatever at 2 in the morning, and you're not expecting it. There's no barrier to entry on social media, which I think is amazing. What that means is I'm essentially having conversations with people that I would never otherwise access. I have tech CEOs in Canada and people in Africa, and I have business owners in Florida, and all these people who would never have a conversation about this because it would never enter their social sphere. All of a sudden, have a pipeline directly into these conversations. So, what are the nature of that campaign? We're getting people proximate to a problem. The other day I did a video talking about the fact that there are 4 million people in this country who can't vote because they have a felony conviction, and the barriers around that. And when I said that number, then everybody was shocked. People are like, I had no idea. I didn't think that was the case, either because I live in California and your rights are automatically restored, or I just didn't realize that many people had gone through the criminal justice system. When I started talking about the numbers like Florida, where nearly 1 million people can't vote because they have a criminal record, even though there was a statewide referendum to restore the rights of people to vote once they were released, it didn't matter. The barriers and the bureaucracy prevented that from happening. And again, I think people just don't know. And once you put a human face on things, and once you connect someone to a story they can relate to, because it could be them, or it could be their child, or it could be their brother or sister or parent, all of a sudden it becomes relevant in a way that it's not when it's just a statistic on a paper.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. We, as I mentioned, are in Utah and Arizona, and one of the things we do in Arizona is restore people's right to vote. And I feel like I've been a voter my whole life. Like I've worked for politicians. I'm like a believer in democracy, but I will never take for granted again just the ability to just vote, to be a participant in the political process after seeing what it felt like for someone to not be able to do that, as well as what it felt like to restore the ability to do that. It is just so important to people. And I get it. But sometimes you can't almost realize the value of something until you've lost it. And when you can help someone get something back that way and see what it means to them. And like if people who voted knew like how
Yeah.
sacred this ability is to people, maybe voting would look different. And so I think people just don't, they don't understand, they don't realize or think about really just the how lucky they are to be able to have that right in the first place. It's interesting. What advice would you give to somebody earlier in their journey? This could be someone who is incarcerated now or maybe just getting out of incarceration. What would you say to that person?
The first thing I usually say is that there are going to be barriers and there are going to be setbacks. That, like you said before, I would love to live in a world where that wasn't the case. But if we go into it expecting it, and we're not so put off when we run into that first barrier, and we run into that dozen or 25 no's. The second thing that I really focus on is, and I do this a lot when I speak inside institutions. I says, you know about the barriers around employment or around housing. You may not know about the barriers around like yourself and the emotional kind of fragility we experience after leaving an institution and coming out into the world. We don't talk about the shaking and crying and not knowing we're having a panic attack in Costco or laying on the floor and not knowing how to cope. And I think again, accepting that that's a part of the process and it's going to come is a lot more makes it a lot less off-putting when it happens for the first time or when that situation. And we don't think, oh my God, what is wrong with me? We're like, oh, this really is hard. Like I really did go through a hard thing, and I'm really dealing with a hard thing now. And the other thing is, I just tell people, you got to keep going. I mean, I can't tell you how many no's I had to hear to get to every yes in pretty much every situation. I have the few oddities where, yeah, I'm at a party and this guy decides to fund a nonprofit, and that's amazing, but that'll probably never happen again. But at the same time, when it came to jobs, when it came to housing, when it came to hunting down that place that I wanted to live, when it came to building those relationships or reaching out to develop those strategic partnerships, yeah, you get a lot of no's, you get a lot of hangups, you get a lot of, lack of response emails or connections on LinkedIn. But if you keep going, eventually you'll get there. The only way to really fail is to quit.
Yeah, I love that. Sounds like you share a relentless personality. What do you think has helped you develop that resilience, that ability to like accept like the no's and yeah, just talk to me about like what then
So I think it's a response to incarceration. I mean, going into a place that feels hopeless, where I feel so completely powerless in 99.9% of my life, that 0.1% that I can control or that I could potentially control, I'm going to work my ass off for it because it's like, yeah, I'm going to write, I remember one year literally we just had no heat. They were just like, yeah, we're sorry, we don't know what's wrong, it's not a big deal, and started writing elected officials. And the first one and the second one and the third one didn't matter. I was going to get somebody who would respond, and sure enough, finally somebody responded, called the prison, threatened them, and they magically fixed the heat. But you can't do that unless you keep going. And I guess it's recognizing one that there is a reward to kind of hard work or to effort, but there's also a faith element. Like there's an element that you have to believe that somewhere at the end of this there's going to be a yes. And for a lot of my life I didn't believe that. And that was why I didn't try hard and I quit when things got difficult. And that's why I was, if it's not easy, it's not supposed to be. But it just took me being in a situation where I had to work uphill for anything, to get a pair of shoes, to get a mattress, to get the commissary that I had paid for, to get whatever. I learned that it would be difficult to get the things that we thought we were supposed to have. That, hey, maybe if we work this hard, we could get some of the things we didn't think we were supposed to have. Maybe there's more possibility out there than we imagined.
I love that so much. So you mentioned mentors, and obviously your organization is very focused on that. Who were your mentors? Who were the people that championed you? And what about what they did for you was most meaningful?
There were, literally in the process of writing a book. So I was going over that chapter this morning. There were a number of mentors who were people inside who had been incarcerated, usually for a long time, who kind of just shared their experience and shared their struggles and shared what they had learned. And that was invaluable. There were people on the outside. I looked to my grandfather, and a big part of the reason was because he wasn't my grandfather by blood. He just adopted me and chose me and said, like, you belong to me now, and I'm going to take care of you, and I'm going to make sure you're okay. And it was one of those things where I realized, like, you can choose to just build a life for somebody. You can choose to give somebody hope, and that's exactly what he did. And then another person was a meditation mentor. He was a family friend, and we started, and he basically was my teacher for the first couple of years. And we had a phone call every week and went through the MumonCon and did all these things. And eventually he became a friend. And he allowed me to support him. I mean, he had this tragic loss of his wife of 40 years and allowed me to support him. So rather than maintaining this role, he became somebody who was like, I will give to you when my cup is full, and like you can give to me when your cup is full. And that taught me not just to kind of like be taught or be mentored, but also to like have value and have agency and find a place to share that with other people. And so I think it was the relationships that developed, both with people who were incarcerated and people on the outside who just again believed in me, but also believed in my ability to be of value to other people.
I love that. That's amazing. Tell me about your family situation. It sounds like you and Courtney have split. What are you thinking about in terms of that?
That's so difficult because I got out of prison, and again the same issues with my mom that were an issue before arose, and so we've taken a lot of distance from each other. Courtney and I broke up, but we're still really good friends. I'm actually on Sunday, so I have like 45 hours to drive. I have to be in Indianapolis where I'm going to see her and then fly to New York for a conference. So I think I really focused on building a found family, and that really was based around Bill, my grandfather, and I lost him last year. And so it was like, okay, cool. Like this is finite. Like we don't get to have these people in our lives forever. So it made me value them all the more. And I have actually a mentor now who lives a long way away, but she and her business partner have become like family. Like every time I get a chance to see them, I feel comfortable in that way you feel, and like around your people or around your home. And I've got people that I've met along the road, or people that I've never met. Like one of my best friends is a guy who lives in Ireland, and we have a video call every week, but we've never met in person. And so I've been
Wow.
able to
How did you
develop
meet
these
him? Like
relationships.
through your social media videos?
Yeah, actually, I reached out to him because he has a really big platform, and I just remember watching him being like, "This guy's brilliant." Like, I want to know somebody who feels that way, and yeah, it reached out and he said the same thing, and we went back and forth, and we were both out in the process of writing a book, and we developed a kind of an acknowledgement of like, "Hey, this is a valuable relationship. I want this kind of relationship in my life," and so we just stay in touch.
That's really incredible and really is a gift of social media. I think it just has the power to connect the right people in a way that they would never otherwise even know each other existed. So I love that for you. That's amazing.
Well, we
Well,
talk about the dividing factors of social media. I'm here in Nevada City with a
no,
couple who saw me on social media and said, "Hey, you're traveling the country. We'd love to host you. Come visit us. Let's go for walks. Let's go do stuff." And I've had an amazing time here. I've learned from them. It's yeah. Again,
that's so
we talk about all the
cool.
bad things, but it can be an amazing thing.